Hey there, Knicks fan.
I hit the wrong button. Sorry. That's my bad. Go ahead. You restart if you'd like to. Sorry, everybody. I hit the wrong button.
But no one's going to hear this.
Yes, you're right. No, it is going to hear it.
Hey there, Knicks fans. How you doing? It's your boy, Jonathan Macri, I'm very delirious, with you for another episode of the Knicks Film School Podcast. I'm just going to bring Andrew Claudio up here. I don't have the energy for a fun or quirky intro. Hi, Andrew. How are you?
Hi, John. How are you today?
I'm very loopy. Extraordinarily loopy. I had a cup of coffee this morning, and I came back to do the Athletic NBA show, and then just the interview that people are about to hear with Dr. Brian Sutterer. But my wife texted me before when I was on my way home. She's like, "I made a pot of coffee if you need a jolt." And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know if I need another cup of coffee today. I might. I haven't decided yet. It's in the cards.
I'm on my steady plan of sugar-free Red Bull and ready for a nap as soon as we finish recording this. So.
You know what? I don't know. My nap window may have expired.
You also, and I know you're going to watch the basketball games tonight. You also don't have a Ranger game to potentially get ready for later. So my nap is coinciding with puck drop at 7 p.m. You know?
Yeah, I think you know what? I may just have to bypass the nap and do a little Macri mini for our patrons. So look forward to that. First, let's talk about the Knicks. So yes, as you can tell from the episode description, we were lucky enough to get Dr. Brian Sutterer, who, if you haven't seen his stuff on Twitter or on YouTube, change that. He is a doctor who has become very, very adept at being able to kind of from afar, again, not having access to the, obviously seeing the players themselves and seeing the imaging and what have you, but from getting pretty darn good at watching the film of this stuff and coming out with some pretty accurate diagnoses. And he put out a video last night on OG Anunoby and Jalen Brunson, that laid out the basics of it, and we spent about 25 minutes going through the specifics of those both of the players and where they're at. I'll just say I feel slightly more encouraged after having the conversation, but I'm curious where other folks lie on that spectrum. Before we get to that, though, I do want to just say a quick word. Last night was I'm still processing it. I don't know that I've kind of gotten all the way there yet, but that might have been the most meaningful Knick game I've watched in my life. And 31 years as a fan, can't ever remember feeling about a team or a player for that matter like the way I feel about them today and felt last night. And yet. And credit to the people who have written about the game and what Brunson was able to do in the way that it should be written about. And yet, it is such a shame that so much of the conversation today is still on the refs. And what bothers me about it is if what happened in game one happened again, where it's okay, there's an obviously wrong call that impacted the result of the game, and it absolutely impacted the result of the game. It was before the DiVincenzo 3. Pace was probably going a fast break, whatever. We don't have to relive it, to say nothing of the Turner screen that was called. That's one thing. That's not what happened. And for Rick Carlisle to go out in front of a microphone after the game and talk about how we're a small market team and the league owes us a chance and all of this nonsense. And then, obviously, the report gets out this morning from Brian Windhorst that the league is going to receive 78, 79, whatever it is, clips that the Pacers are sending in of calls they disagreed with over the first two games. That's that's more Bush League than anything Nick Nurse said or did in the first series. Or at least it's right up there for me. And, it's kind of a shame because there were a whole lot. And look, Rick Carlisle is a damn good coach. I think he's catching a lot of heat today because he's trying to make this about what he's trying to make it about, and not about, as you pointed out on Twitter, as only you can, the fact that the Pacers' biggest enemy last night may not have been the three guys wearing the striped shirts, but the guy holding the clipboard. So, yeah.
Imagine being the league and getting a report.
You're on mute.
Am I? Test 1 2. Test 1 2. Are you sure you just can't hear me?
Never mind. You're not on mute.
Okay, I was about to say. Oh, you had a Rick Carlisle moment. You have no idea.
I did have a Rick Carlisle moment.
Who to blame on that one? Imagine being the league. I just don't know if this is common or not, or maybe this is just like, I know Daryl Morey submitted a report during that Warriors series in 2019, but 78 calls to go over. Like, a coach sent me 78 plays to look at over 2 games. Like, I don't know if that's normal. I understand, like, Tibbs has said I've sent in a dozen here or there. Like, Brunson, these are fouls, you know, and we appreciate him standing up for his superstar. When you're a team that doesn't draw contact and relies on ball movement a ton, you have 78 plays out there that are perceived as, like, controversial to the league, and you're making them do homework. I have no idea what I know what the angle is. Like, you're standing up for your players, you're trying to put pressure on the refs for your home game coming up in game 3. Fine. I just shout out to the people that have been talking about why they lost the game last night. Caitlin Cooper, Benji Ritholtz, us. Yep. They lost because they gave up 130 points to a Knicks team that didn't have OG Anunoby for a quarter and a half and Jalen Brunson for a quarter and a half. That's why. The one thing that the Knicks couldn't clearly stop for the first 2 games was TJ McConnell and Obi Toppin, who barely played the entire fourth quarter of the last 2 games. So,
or how about, and that too, and, like, you know, Pacers number 2 offense in the league, number 2 offense all time in NBA history, scored 50 points in the second half of the game. You know, you know, look, they have a lot to think about. Series isn't over yet. I you know, Pat Riley says playoff series begin when road team wins a game. Road team hasn't, or excuse me, when the home team loses a game. It's the same thing, I guess, right? Yeah.
Which still doesn't make sense, because if the Pacers lose game 3, the series is over.
So what did I say?
No, that quote is correct. What Pat Riley said, but it needs to be amended for if the series doesn't begin until, like, he usually says it after game 1. Like, the series doesn't begin until the home team loses a game. But if you go down 3-0 because the road team finally won a game, then the series is over, Pat.
Yes. Well, no, but then the series begins and ends in one game.
There you go. It's over. It started, Pat. You're right. Now it's over.
Yeah. And look, as you're going to hear with Dr. Sutterer here, it's like, you know, OG, it's up in the air. Jalen Brunson might be up in the air for game 3 or maybe more for all we know. I don't want to, like, what they're doing is what, you know, with the, obviously, because here's the other part of it, right? And Thibodeau has talked this season, like, this is what the Knicks do too. Like, and I'm sure every team does this. They send in he's talked about, we send in our clips and we're told, like, this, and this. So every team does this. For the Pacers to leak this, obviously, is with the intent of trying to gain attention on it and to try to, as they see it, tip the balance of the scales here. Which, again, you're trying to win the series. Series isn't over yet. I get it. It's just, I don't know, kind of put a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth.
They look like weenies, and I think it might work, because the last time we heard someone file a grievance, Joel Embiid gave us a free throw-a-thon in a game he should have been ejected. So, look, it may not... listen, let's get to the interview with Dr. Sutterer, because it may not matter who the Pacers put out there on the floor if they get a favorable whistle, if the Knicks aren't at full strength anyway.
Yeah, well, so again, we're recording this introduction. It's about 2:00 on Wednesday or Thursday, excuse me. I will, you know, if and when we have an update about OG and or Brunson, if it warrants us kind of coming back on again, we will try to do so. We may not get another emergency live stream just because we're you know, it's been a day. But look, if it's huge news, then which hopefully it's not huge news. Anyway, all right. enough for me. Here is my conversation with Dr. Brian Sutterer. Joining me now on the Knicks Film School podcast, a guest that I have been a fan of his work for some time, and I was so thankful that we could get him on short notice. Literally, we're like barely 12 hours removed from the end of Game 2 of Knicks Pacers, and boy, oh boy, is what we're going to talk about relevant to what's going on. You've seen him on Twitter, you've seen his YouTube videos. If you haven't seen his YouTube videos, go subscribe to his YouTube channel. We'll make sure we put a link in the description of this episode. But Dr. Brian Sutterer, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well, thanks. I'll tell your fans, I'm recording this from Indiana, so I'm recording this right now. I'm in hostile territory. I actually grew up in Indiana, so on this side of the series here, I will admit I'm pulling a little bit for the Pacers, but that's okay. Medical information can be unbiased, so we won't let that influence it.
If you're from Indiana, it's fine. It would be weird if you weren't pulling for the Pacers, at least a little bit. So let's get into it here. So you put out a video last night talking about the injuries to OG Anunoby and Jalen Brunson, and I want to dig into both of those guys a little bit more. First and foremost, I would encourage everybody listening or watching to take a few minutes, watch the video, some of the stuff that you've gone over, and more kind of pay it forward and see where we go from here. So let's start with OG. So on the video you went through great pains to describe how there are really two different types of hamstring injuries. And correct me at any point in time if I say something incorrect, please correct me. But there's a stretch injury and then a sprint injury, and you kind of diagnosed the play that he got hurt from. And why don't we start there? Where did you come out, and what's the big difference between those two things?
Yeah, so there's in general two ways that the muscle tears. When we talk about a hamstring strain, I think this is important because I got a little pushback. I titled the video OG Anunoby tears his hamstring, and a lot of people commented, well, it's just a strain. Why are you calling it a tear? And a tear is a strain. A strain is a tear. The word tear just sounds more severe, but at a root fundamental, if you go look at those muscle fibers, a strain is a tear in the muscle fibers. And then, of course, there's severity in terms of how big that tear is. So a strain is a tear is a strain. And I think that there's always a difficult time, and then this will play into with Brunson as well, the difference between an injury and being hurt, because the reporting we saw for both guys was just pain and soreness, right? Brunson dealing with left foot or right foot soreness, and OG was dealing with hamstring soreness or hamstring pain. I think that makes it sound better, but I think whenever there has been pain, there's been something that's happened to the tissue to cause that pain. Now, of course, you can have just a cramp. We see guys all the time that pull up with just a muscle cramp. I think by now we probably would have heard that. We probably would have heard after the game, it was just a cramp. He'll be just fine. And so I think when you look at that play, it probably was more of the sprint type. And so in that case, those are the more common ones. That's what we typically see on the football field, on the basketball court. Somebody's running down the court, going up for a jump. As they push off of that hamstring, the muscle fibers just get stretched beyond what they can withstand, and you get a little tear in those muscle fibers. The other type is if you think of somebody, if I try and do the splits, I'm not going to be able to do the splits. My muscle is just going to be stretched beyond the point that it naturally wants to go. I'm not running. I'm just going in a position where the muscle gets stretched beyond where it wants to normally be. And that's sort of the other case. And there's some minutia there, depending on which muscle might be injured, one versus the other. It's generally, I think, better to have more the sprinting type, which I think is what probably happened with OG, because it looked like he kind of came up a little bit short as he was trying to go up with that layup before the moment where he kind of landed awkward. So I would say, just from that, it's probably more optimistic than not. But hamstring, we talk about grades, severity. This can really be all over the place in terms of recovery time, depending on what we hear.
So that's the other thing that I wanted to get at, and I don't think you talked a whole lot about like grade 1 versus grade 2 versus grade 3 on the video, but because we're all crazy Knicks fans over here, and we do our own research. Yeah, there you go. People talking about grade 1 is like you might miss a couple games, whereas grade 2 is something that's like weeks. I'm having trouble understanding how there can be such a clear line of delineation between those two things. Is there like no gray area? Like, could you elucidate on that a little bit more?
There's a lot of gray area. Whenever it comes to ligaments. So we hear a lot about like a grade 1, 2, 3 MCL sprain, for example, around a knee. With ligaments, it's a lot more clear cut. So with a ligament, if you think of, ligament fibers like the ropes, like my fingers, a grade 1 is when there's just a little bit of a stretch. A grade 2 is when it's partially torn. A grade 3 is when it's completely torn. So that's a very clear delineation. Okay. With muscles, it's not quite as clear cut just because there's not, you don't like fully rip a muscle in half, right? And so it depends more on, there's a couple different ways to classify it. One is just clinically, how bad are the symptoms? So is there a lot of pain with walking versus pain only with running? So for example, if somebody doesn't really have any pain just walking up and down the floor, but when they try and run, they have pain, that might be more of like a more mild grade 1. You can also classify them based on what you see on the MRI scan. So on the MRI, you'll be able to see how extensive that tear is. If there's just a small little tiny area where some muscle fibers got torn, but there's no big blood hematoma, collection of where those muscle fibers have torn, that might be more of a grade 1 versus a grade 2. There's more extensive, it's bigger, and there's some number measurements that some different systems use. So thinking of it with muscles, really severity from just a clinical standpoint and the imaging as well. But with ligaments, tendons, it's a little bit more clear cut, with grade 1 being a little bit of a stretch, grade 2 partially torn, grade 3 completely torn.
So maybe the most interesting thing for Knicks fans at this point is, and I don't want to get too excited about this, but you noted that OG popped up after he fell relatively soon, and I believe you said the fact that he was able to walk off, walk kind of on his own was a good sign for you, and potentially an indication that this might only be a couple of games. Can you speak more on that?
Yeah, I'm hopeful. And I think some of that is honestly me not wanting, I'd rather, it's always hard to that balance because I know nothing, right? I don't know his scan. Yeah. I've not examined him. And so the fan in me wants him out there, and I want to have the Pacers going up against him. I think too, when we get into the playoffs, that scale in terms of recovery time is always going to be pushed more aggressive. If something like this happens during the regular season, you've got more time, you're going to be more conservative. In the playoffs, games are more spread out. And so I think the best case scenario is this is a 7 to 10 day kind of thing, if it truly was in fact an injury. And I think if you try and kind of read into I don't think we've gotten any reporting yet on
we have
really an update on either of them. And oftentimes, I encourage fans, and I'll talk a lot about, look at the sequence of how quickly players were ruled out. So when OG goes back into the locker room, the medical staff, athletic trainer, they're in New York. I assume their team physician, their team doctor is there in the locker room with them. And it's pretty easy to right away say, okay, we know somebody's done. We know this is a bad enough pain, injury, you name it, that we know they're not going to go. And so that's whenever you hear the quick, they're ruled out right away. That when we see guys go down with a torn ACL, right away you get that report in 15 minutes, done for the day. Other times we get that report where it's questionable. They're probable. And the fact that OG was ruled out right away, and it wasn't he's questionable to return. Sure, the fact that he was ruled out right away is what makes me think this was more of a true hamstring injury as opposed to just some cramping. Because if they got back there and they thought he was just cramping, it's a very close game. They're going to say, well, we're going to give him a chance to get back out there and play. So his status is questionable. The fact that they ruled him out right away makes me more concerned that this is at least a true sort of hamstring strain, hamstring injury, as opposed to just cramps like some people were hoping. The severity, though, is yet to be determined. And a lot of people, people walk off the court after Achilles ruptures. I think it's good when they walk off the court, but to me, doesn't necessarily say one way or the other. I think I'm just trying to be hopeful.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's, which is fine. So it sounds like we really do need to kind of wait here. I mean, I said last night, again, not knowing anything, if you told me that, OG was done for the rest of the series with whatever that might entail for the Knicks and the Pacers, but that, he'd be back for game 1 of the next series if the Knicks get there, which again, they got to win 2 more games. I'd probably sign for it. Just again, not knowing what we know now. Again, if you had to just literally kind of guess based on what we know right now, could you see him coming back within the next couple of weeks? Is that crazy to assume?
No, I definitely could. And I think the other thing to consider too is the sort of gamesmanship of where they're at in the playoff series too, because I think For example, if let's say the Knicks come out and they win game 3 and suddenly they're up 3-0 and they've got a player who's a little bit hobbled, who's dealing with a little bit of an injury, it's kind of at that line of, can we push it? Can we not? Like what Jamal Murray was going through with Denver, where he's hurt, but there's kind of this balance of how much do you push it? If the Knicks are in a situation where they're up 3-0 or they're up 3-1, maybe you don't take as much of a chance and you give OG more time to heal up for the next series. And so I think absolutely, if this series goes 6-7 games, I think they're going to do everything to try and push him and get him back this series. But if we don't see him for 2 weeks, that might simply be because the Knicks are up 3-0. They're having an easy time in the series, and there's no reason to push him back until they really need to push him back. But I think if you were to, have me put money on it, I'd say I expect he's probably going to miss maybe a couple of games at least. And then it just is a matter of how the severity of it, and then honestly where they are in terms of how bad they're trying to push to get guys back out there and kind of toe that line of risk reward at that point in the series.
So I'm going to transition to Jalen, but in doing so, I want to ask 2 quick questions that apply to both of these guys, and we'll take one at a time. Everybody on the Knicks has been playing a really wild minutes load, and we know the reasons for that. Again, you've done video on Julius Randle. They're banged up, and they're not exactly the deepest of teams at some point. If are either of the injuries that you saw last night, again from Brunson and Anunoby, do you think one or the other or both or neither is more likely the result of just overuse?
I don't think so, to be honest. Okay. Both of them, mainly because both of them seem to be pretty clear moments where something changed. I think the difference, we hear about guys who just are dealing with, they come out of a game and at some point they kind of felt a little bit sore. But with Jalen, we could pretty clearly see the play where something happened and he motioned to be taken out of the game. With OG, obviously there was one play.
Who maybe didn't see the video, you're the first person I saw, you're the only person I saw who did a great job of highlighting from the correct camera angle the exact moment where it seems like the injury happens to Brunson. So again, just for anybody who hasn't watched your video, go and watch that video. You can see yourself.
Yeah, so I don't think these were overuse types of things. Now, there's no doubt the more fatigued guys get, the more difficulty you have just controlling your muscles, controlling your joints, being stable. But that, everybody's going through this at this point in the season, and it's tough like that for everybody.
And then the second thing, and again, this pertains to both of them. I think, and I'm sure the Knicks are concerned about this too. The concept of risk of re-injury. Again, knowing what we don't know right now, which is a lot because we haven't got any other reporting on this, is one of these guys maybe more at risk of a re-injury than the other? Both different, whatever.
Yeah, I would pick Jalen between the two of them. I think in Jalen's case, I'm less concerned that we're going to find out he's got some injury that's going to keep him out for a while. But if you think, again, something happened in his foot that made his foot hurt to the point where he missed a lot of the game. And it's, again, that balance of, in a crucial game, you're not taking your time. If someone can get back out there, you're getting them back out there. And so there was clearly something happened to his foot that made his foot hurt. And we saw him hampered by it in the second half. Now, the rest of that was just pure adrenaline that got him to play as dominant as he did. But clearly when he came out at the start of the second half, we could all see he was hobbled. And so there was something, whether it was a little muscle that got pulled in his foot, a little ligament that got a little bit sprained, nothing to the point of, hey, there's a fracture, something's grossly unstable, we need to shut you down. But there was clearly pain. And when there's pain, it's often harder to appropriately rest in a way where you're not going to continue to have some degree of pain with a long playoff road ahead of you. I think, Lakers fans remember this with LeBron when he kept dealing with his foot injury. There's no specific, we have to shut you down. It's this balance of up and down. How much does it hurt? And so it wouldn't surprise me if Jalen comes back and plays game 3, but as the minutes pile up, as the games pile up, maybe that foot gets a little bit more sore to the point where it's, again, we're not really needing to shut you down, but how much is it going to affect your performance being out there? So I think OG's is probably going to be a more clear, here's the injury, here's the time frame. Whereas I expect Brunson is probably going to be more of a, hey, your foot's sore, we can play through it. How much it affects you is to be determined.
It's maybe a silly question, but okay, so let's say he goes back out there and experiences some degree of pain. is, I'm picturing like, is there like a bar where, the pain gets up to like a certain point and then it gets far enough where it's like, you have to rest to get it back down. So it's a matter of like picking and choosing your spots of when you want to put the bar up and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we fight this a lot. So I have a college that I work with and take care of their athletes. And whenever you're evaluating somebody, so those first evaluations they're doing in the locker room for Brunson, there's easy things like we can get an x-ray, we can make sure nothing's broken. That's quick, check that sort of box off. The next thing you're going to do is there's some specific injuries, tendon ruptures, Liz Frank tears. There's some injuries around the body that you can pretty quickly diagnose with your physical exam and say, okay, this is not something you can continue through. Once you kind of work through all those and check all those off the list, a lot of times these guys still have pain, but you've done your best to rule out something that could be a more serious injury, but they just still hurt. And so then the decision-making process is more about how's their function. So back in the locker room, they were probably doing a lot of functional tests with him, meaning sprinting, jumping, jumping jacks, up, down, cutting, changing directions. And if an athlete's able to do that in an optimal, safe way and they feel comfortable with it, that's usually when you're going to let them keep playing. And so a lot of what we'll probably see with Brunson is that, testing it pregame. We're going to see how he's reacting, how his performance is, because as much as a player wants to play, you've also got to remind him if he's a half second slow to where he can't play defense and everybody's going around him, it doesn't matter how tough he is. The team has to decide, look, you're not going to be effective out there as much as you want to play. And so it's a lot of that functional, how do you perform on the court? And then the pain question is really, you can follow day to day, week to week. Are things getting worse? Are they sort of staying at a solid level? And then it also involves the athlete in the decision making. How much pain are they willing to tolerate? How safe is it? How functional are they moving? And Brunson eventually looked like he was moving pretty good last night, I got to say. So how much of it was the adrenaline? I don't know. And I don't think he wasn't in a boot or anything like that after the game that we heard of, was he?
No, not that we heard of or not that we saw. Just to follow up on the adrenaline thing, this happened with Jimmy Butler in game 1 of the playoffs last year with New York and Miami, where he finished that game and then missed the next game. And Jimmy Butler and Jalen Brunson are cut from the same cloth. Like if they could go out and play, they're going to try to play.
Too, Butler had that MCL in his knee that he continued playing the game and the play-in. Yeah.
Absolutely. So is there a possibility that like Brunson was able to go last night, but he's waking up right now and getting out of bed and be like, holy crap.
Absolutely. Yeah. There definitely is. Yeah. And so part of me still does kind of hold my breath, just waiting for that first update because absolutely he could have gotten up this morning, gotten to the facility, and he is limping like heck, and they re-examine him and it's, oh boy, like, okay, maybe something has changed here. We're getting an MRI of the foot. And then that maybe gets a little bit more dicey. So you hope that today is more than normal post-game soreness and not something really severe and significant. Yeah. But I'm kind of surprised we haven't heard an update yet. I don't really know if that's good or bad. I don't follow Knicks enough to know like what their kind of injury reporting speed is for these kind of things. It's not great.
Don't forget, this is the organization that told us that OG Anunoby had a I forget what the designation they used on his elbow. Oh yeah, right up until they're like, yeah, no, he's going to get surgery. Listen, this is what they do. A couple more, and you've been amazing with your time, and then I'll get you out of here. In terms of, and again, I want to couch all of these with like, you haven't examined him, you haven't looked at any imaging, but from what you could tell of this injury and how it might linger forward, because that's the word you kept using, is it could linger. What would be some of the ways that he would be impacted specifically in terms of what he's able to do and not do on a basketball court?
I think mostly the side-to-side stuff. I think most of these guys do pretty well when it's just running in a straight line. But when it comes to side-to-side, that side-to-side push-off requires a lot more use from the ligaments and the muscles in your foot to maintain that stability. If you think of, a great example of this is one of the ways that people get a Liz Frank tear in the foot. Think about like Chet Holmgren, the summer game. One of the ways like a Liz Frank injury occurs is when you're on the ball of your foot and you're kind of pushing off to the side. And so those positions where you're on the ball of your feet, where you're pushing side to side, demand a lot more stress and support from those structures in your foot. And so those are the things that I would expect to be more painful as opposed to just him being able to run and jump and shoot. So you probably are going to see more of that kind of penetrating quickness, the defense being able to get side to side. Those would be the things I would expect would be more bothersome for him.
I wasn't going to ask this, but you just said the words Liz Frank. Does this, again, if he goes out and tries to play on this and he's not 100%, and presumably he's not going to be 100% for a little while, does that bring that sort of possibility into play more?
Yeah, only if there's some partial, really mild Liz Frank sprain that they decide it's safe enough for him to try and play through. If there's anything else in the foot, no. And that was one of the injury mechanisms I looked at pretty close to try and find something on the footage if it would fit. And I really didn't see anything on the footage that necessarily fit with that, which was reassuring. It's so hard though at this point because these guys hurt everywhere at this point in the season. I mean, their feet hurt, their knees hurt, their shoulders hurt, like everything hurts. Yeah. And so trying to tease out, what's the different hurt. But I think too, an injury like that, I think they'd be safe enough with him that they know they've got to protect his future, that they wouldn't put him back out there with something that's going to, be disastrous.
Sure. So last one, and again, maybe this is because I've followed this organization for a very long time and I'm always curious about these sorts of things. Brunson said last night he did not get an MRI, so one, I want to know what you made of that, and two, is it safe to assume that they gave him an MRI today, and like, would it be irresponsible not to give him an MRI?
Yeah, well, they definitely wouldn't have done one right away yesterday. I mean, I think there are some organizations that potentially have access to do an MRI like that night if they're in their hometown, but typically you wouldn't hear about a player getting an MRI that night anyways, even if it was something that was known to be serious. I think the decision to have one today depends. There's a couple of different options there. One, just the philosophy of the medical staff. Some medical staffs are going to be much more imaging heavy where they just decide, you know what, something happens, someone hurts, we're going to get an MRI and we're not even going to really think about it. The bigger thing though, I think just from a kind of foundational decision-making is how much he hurts today. And if something is different on his exam today, because presumably last night, you're not going to put an athlete back out on the court with something that you think requires an MRI to diagnose. You're going to put the athlete back out on the court if you think that they don't have something that needs an MRI. Now, if this morning that changes, there's more pain, something's different, then that's when you would get the MRI. Because the other challenge is if you get an MRI, sometimes you see a lot of stuff you don't know what to do about. You don't just see 99% normal and one thing abnormal. You see like a lot of gray, you see a lot of overuse stuff that can really kind of cloud the picture. And so sometimes you almost don't want to have to get the MRI because if you do, you might see something that then makes it harder to decide, is that swelling in the bone? Is that related? Is that old? Is that so that's where that art of medicine comes into play. And at that point too, as much as teams want to be upset about their medical staffs, I think at that point you just got to give in to the expertise of the medical staff and hope that they're going to do the best good job they can, because at that level, I mean, you don't get to the level of being a medical team doctor at that profession, if you're not pretty good at what you do, as much as fans, I think, get disappointed in some of the communication.
No, totally. Well, listen, Doc, you are very good at what you do, and the entire sports community is very lucky to have you out there. And again, you've become my go-to for, it's like an injury happens or the team provides an update or whatever. And it's like, all right, I'm going to make sure I catch your video that you have out. And by the way, how you're able to get these things out so fast is like,
it's almost, I've got an expectation now. Last night I was getting messages about, I'm looking at the footage of Brunson. I'm like, I don't see anything. I think he's going to come back. I don't go rush and do something. But yeah, people are like, I got all kinds of Twitter DMs from you crazy Knicks fans. Like, help us. Like it happened 5 minutes ago and I haven't even looked at the play yet. No, I love sports. I mean, that's why I went into the profession, is I love watching sports, and it's always exciting to see how much fans enjoy learning, and being interested about the medical stuff and learning from it. So I feel lucky to be able to do what I do with it.
Well, again, we're lucky to have you. Before I let you go, anything you want to plug, promote, direct people to where they could find you and your stuff?
No, just Twitter and YouTube. I'm not on any other social media. No TikTok, no Instagram, Snapchat, all that other stuff. Just Twitter and YouTube. Easy to find. Just my name. And hopefully, if something, it's nice to help serve some of these fan communities, but it's, hopefully I don't have to do any more videos about the Knicks here the rest of the way.
Doc, I mean this with my full heart and soul. I hope I never have to watch another video from you again.
Love it. Yeah. Love it. Love it. Absolutely. That was great. I appreciate you taking the time to chat.
Thanks so much. Okay. Hope you enjoyed that conversation with the doc. Again, thought it was very enlightening. Andrew, I'll just ask you, what are your thoughts?
His optimism that this isn't something long-term with OG, as far as I'm concerned, that this could be like the could of it all. I understand why doctors do that. They give their best guess, so they don't go to absolutes, like definitively what you can't prove. I think OG Anunoby will probably miss the rest of the Pacer series. And I think I'm okay with that. And then I don't know. His hypothesis matched with what I'm curious the Knicks' goals are for this playoffs. They're making me consider what I want for the rest of this playoffs. Do I want them to bring OG back on a potentially not 100% hamstring and potentially have something worse happen against the Celtics, and then the injury goes into next season? Do I want them to risk Brunson potentially sustaining an injury that makes him miss a year when, so it's why I'm internally conflicted and trying to enjoy what last night was just as a Knicks fan and a win, while also look, the beauty of what this season has been for me. And it's never that I didn't trust Tibbs necessarily, but there was always a clear disconnect in like the medical staff and Tibbs, like, could they get him to honor a minutes restriction? And he clearly will, if need be. Like we saw it with Hartenstein and with Brunson. He was like, hey, there's a limit. This is what you can go over. This is what you can't go over. And he listened. And if you weren't on a minutes limit, you were playing 100 minutes a game. Hi, Josh Hart. So that's where I'm at. Are we headed for an OG Anunoby playoff minutes limit? Are we headed for a Brunson minutes limit on Friday? Like I have more trust in the organization to be in lockstep with their head coach and with their players. I do think Brunson's going to play Friday. I don't know how smart that is, but I do think he's going to play Friday. But I would be shocked if we see OG the rest of the series.
I mean, look, frankly, I don't know what to think in terms of which guy. If I was a betting man, I too would bet that we are not going to see OG Anunoby for the rest of the series. But implicit in that bet, and again, this is kind of based on what the doc said about like, hey, if this ends up in a 6 or 7 game series, is it possible maybe they try to push him to get themselves over the hump? At this point, maybe this is just me being naive. Maybe this is me living off the fumes of last night. If you ask me right now, even with no OG Anunoby and even with Brunson losing or missing another game, I don't know, man. There's still part of me that thinks they're going to figure out a way to win this in series in 5 games.
5. Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. And that, look, Pacers go in 4 straight for all we know. We have no idea. Like they've played well enough at times on offense, to warrant, I think, that. And by the way, the Knicks have shot the lights out of the ball from 3 in both of these games. We haven't seen a poor Knicks shooting performance yet. Now, part of that has to do with the Pacers defense. Look, I guess really the only question would be if we got to a game 7, would they try to push OG? That's really the question. And as far as Brunson, it's like you heard the doc say, it's probably going to be a pain tolerance thing. And if I know Jalen Brunson, he's forget game 4. He's going to try to go out there for game 3. Yes, you trust the medical staff to not send either of these guys out there for a further risk of re-injury, which is why I asked the doc about that would linger into next season. Because look, let me end with this. There is a cognitive dissonance for me, at least, when we all talk about how, on one hand, this team has earned our ultimate respect. This team should never be counted out. This team could beat anyone on a given night. Why not? Why not now? Why not us? All of those things. Between all of that and then me on the other side of my mouth, I'm going to sit here and be like, yeah, that's all wonderful. We love all of it. Do not fuck with next season.
Yes.
Like, you know, you got, there's no Julius Randle's not coming back. You know, there's no world where you're going to get more than this amount of guys, whether it's that you had OG or you don't add OG. So the notion that they should put the future at risk, putting aside basketball, like it's not like Jalen Brunson's 27 years old. OG Anunoby's 26 years old. Like if they could go and you feel 100% okay about it as a medical staff for your organization and they are okay with it as players, you let them go. Otherwise, this team has given us more memories than 20 years worth of Knicks teams, you know? So from that, and by the way, they've I don't want to say they've accomplished their goal because their goal is to win a championship. I get that. But like if everybody's collective opinion about the Knicks, regardless of what happens the rest of the series, I don't think you can get any higher. You know, they're in such a great place right now moving forward. You don't want to jeopardize that to try to, you know, and put anybody at risk.
Like I said, and like you just said, if there is a risk at all to next season, that's the answer to the question, why not now? We finally found the answer. Why not now? Okay, that's why. That's why. Okay, that's why not now. Because it could affect next season. And look, if you want to project ahead, and I know respect the opponent one game at a time, blah, 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 right? So game 4 is Sunday, Mother's Day. Mm-hmm. Game 5 is Tuesday, May 14th. This isn't like the conference semis in which, like, if both the Knicks and the Celtics potentially win in 5, that they'll move the series up significantly. Like game 1 wouldn't be Saturday. The schedules are set where that if the series ends in 5 on the 14th, then game 1 or game 1 is either the 19th or the 20th, no matter what. Like the Eastern Conference semis or the Eastern Conference Finals is already scheduled on the NBA calendar for the 19th or the 20th if both teams are available to play. If, let's say, the Cavs can do us a favor, or the Knicks, again, we're projecting that the Knicks win in 5, right? Say the Cavs can push that to 6 or 7. Not likely, but say they can.
Oh, no, not likely.
Then you're looking at the 21st or the 22nd. So I wonder if that's part of the calculation. Like, let's wrap this thing up in 5, you know, so that way we can get a legitimate week off. But if you're even just looking at the OG timetable, that, you know, if you're thinking game 1 of the conference finals and it could be technically, my God, 13 days from now, then that's some reason for optimism as a Knicks fan. If you're worried about OG Anunoby, based off of the conversation and the update we heard from someone with way more information than us.
Yeah, no, totally. Well, look, we'll see. I think game 3 is going to be very interesting. I mean, all the pressure is obviously going to be on Indiana. I'll be curious how they come out and respond to that pressure. Obviously, we're all going to be curious to see if Jalen Brunson plays. But yeah, man, I don't really have anything else. Any final thoughts from you?
They're not like us.
I really got to hear I really got to hear that song.
Maybe for your birthday, whenever that is in the future, I'll totally like walk you through all of the diss tracks. We'll just have like a marathon and we'll walk through all of them.
Please don't. The last diss track that I remember listening to was
Gonna Ether?
What was it called? No, Hail Mary.
Oh, which one is that?
Hold on.
Now
you're gonna get me to look.
Now we're in our bag.
Hail Mary diss track. Yeah, that's right. 50 Cent, Eminem, and it was a diss of, was it like Ja Rule?
Ja Rule, yeah.
That was it. Yeah, Ja Rule diss. That's what it was. That song came out in. When did that song come out?
2013. It looks like.
No, it's got to be.
That might just be the YouTube that is saying. That might be earlier than what I'm looking at.
Yeah, I think. Oh no, actually, I think you're off by a decade. It's
2003.
2003.
Yes.
Yeah,
Chris wasn't born yet.
Yeah, that's the last diss track that had any meaning to my life. Anyway, in other news, I'm turning 41 tomorrow. Okay.
Happy birthday, John.
No. Okay. Thank you, Andrew Claudio. I am gonna. Shit. I don't even know if I have a time to record a mini. Man, these days.
But you're recording after the games tonight.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Because it's after the new batch of information, the games.
Yeah. So yeah. If there's any patrons out there listening, stay tuned. You're gonna get some couple of different episodes in the next several days. One by myself, one with me and Andrew. Fear not, that's all coming your way. And but until then, and until the next episode of the Knicks Film School Podcast here on this feed, take care. Have a what's last of your week, and we will see you for Game 3. Peace out.